October 1987, Harlem, an apartment building off 147th Street. The hallway smells like old paint and fried food, the kind of smell that lives in the walls of every uptown tenement from here to the Bronx. Inside a third-floor apartment, 4 young men are counting money. Then the door comes off the hinges, gunmen in the doorway. No talking, no demands, just muzzle flash in a cramped living room. When the shooting stops, 2 men are dead on the carpet. A third is bleeding out against the wall, 9 bullets in his body, somehow still breathing. He was barely in his 20s. By his own account in later interviews, he was already pulling in around $100,000 a week. He had a teenage cocaine operation that celebrities knew by name. And the man who pulled that trigger, or ordered it, is a question that Harlem is still arguing about almost 40 years later. His name is Azie Faison, and the streets of uptown Manhattan called him Ace. Let me paint the picture for you, because you cannot understand Azie, you cannot understand Rich, you cannot understand Alpo, unless you understand the Harlem they stepped into. And the Harlem they stepped into was a graveyard of kings. 1977, Nicky Barnes, Mr. Untouchable, appears on the cover of the New York Times magazine. By the end of that year, he was convicted in federal court. By the early 1980s, he had flipped, turned witness, and burned his own counsel to ash. Frank Lucas and his Country Boys crew had already been dismantled by the mid-1970s. The old kings, the men who moved heroin by the suitcase through the 60s and 70s, were either in cells, in graves, or in witness protection. Harlem had a vacuum, and a vacuum on those streets does not stay empty for long. I have been telling these stories for years, and this part still hits different for me. The kids who filled that vacuum were not grown men coming up through a mafia structure. They were teenagers, literal teenagers. Boys who could not legally buy a beer were about to sit on top of an empire. Azie Faison grew up on 147th Street between 8th Avenue and Bradhurst. Sugar Hill was around the corner, but his Sugar Hill was not Duke Ellington and Langston Hughes. His Sugar Hill was project benches and stairwells and kids hustling nickel bags by the handball court. His father was not in the picture. His mother worked. The Harlem of the early 1980s had just watched the heroin era collapse into a new thing, something white, something hard, something that came in a jar, crack. By 1984, it was on the streets in small quantities. By 1985, it was a wildfire. By 1986, there was not a block in central Harlem without a crew working a corner. And here's where it gets interesting. Because Azie did not start on crack. He has said in interviews and in his book, Game Over, that he started hustling powder cocaine as a young teenager, working for older guys in the neighborhood. Not crack, not yet. He was moving powder to a clientele that still had jobs, still had money, still wanted the old Studio 54 high. But here's the thing, it gets bigger because by his own account in his memoir, in the early 1980s, he linked up with a Dominican Connect Uptown who began fronting him significant weight while he was still in his mid-teens, not ounces, kilos. At 15 or 16 years old, this kid was already past the corner boy stage. He had a supplier. He had a price point nobody else in Harlem could match, and he was quiet about it. That was the part that separated Azie from everybody else in the beginning. He did not flash. He did not floss. He moved like a grown man who had been doing this for 20 years. I want you to sit with that for a second. He was old enough to be a high school sophomore. He was making more money in a weekend than most grown men in Harlem made in a year. Now, around this same stretch, 2 other names start rising on those same blocks. A kid named Rich Porter, also from 147th Street, charismatic, handsome, dressed like a movie star before the movie existed. And a kid named Alpo Martinez from up on 143rd Street, originally from the Bronx, of Dominican background. Loud where Azie was quiet, hungry in a way that made older hustlers nervous. The streets called him Alpo. The three of them were not a formal crew. The media and the streets would later call them the mob, but they were not a sworn organization like Nicky Barnes's council. They were three young dudes from the same few blocks, who were all eating at the same time, who ran in the same circles, who wore the same Dapper Dan, who pulled up to the same clubs, who knew each other's business because uptown is small when you're at the top. 6 blocks. That's it. The kingdom they built, the one the whole hip-hop world would later write songs about, was essentially 6 blocks of central Harlem. That's not a dealer. That's an empire compressed into a shoebox. But the money was just the beginning. What happened next turned 3 kids from 147th Street into Harlem legend, and one of them into a ghost. By 1986, Azie Faison is moving, by his own estimates in his book and in the documentary, Cocaine Cowboys 2 Hustling with the Godmother, around 100 kilos a month. Now, I want to be careful here because those numbers come from his own telling, and dealers inflate and memories blur, and federal estimates on guys in his orbit varied wildly. But even if you cut that number in half, even if you cut it in a quarter, you are still looking at a teenager with a tractor trailer's worth of cocaine passing through his hands every single month. Do the math on that. A kilo of cocaine in New York in the mid-1980s was going for somewhere between $17,000 and $22,000 wholesale, depending on the quality and the connect. Even at 50 kilos a month at a modest markup, this boy is seeing $1 million in profit every 30 days, free and clear. Journalists writing about this era have described Harlem in the mid-1980s as a place where a new kind of wealth emerged. Young, black, and illegal with no blueprint for what came after. And that quote hits because there was no blueprint. Nicky Barnes had gone to prison. Frank Lucas had gone to prison. The old mafia money laundering rules, the Swiss accounts, the legitimate fronts, none of that was being passed down to these kids. They were making it up as they went along. So what did they do with the money? They wore it, literally. They wore it on their backs, on their wrists, on their necks, on their feet. Let me walk you through a Dapper Dan fitting in 1986. Dapper Dan's boutique on 125th Street in Harlem. Open 24 hours a day, velvet couches, a cash register that never stopped ringing. Dan Day, the man himself, taking Louis Vuitton, Gucci, MCM canvas and cutting it up into custom leather jackets, suits, car interiors, hats. Nothing that ever came through legitimate licensing. All of it handmade in the back of a Harlem storefront for the hustlers who couldn't walk into the Fifth Avenue stores without getting followed by security. Rich Porter was Dapper Dan's walking billboard. Alpo, too. Azie, according to Dan himself in later interviews, was more understated, but he was in there. The Gucci jogging suits, the fur-lined bombers, the MCM luggage for the trips to the Poconos, the Mercedes with custom Louis Vuitton interiors. I'll be honest, when I first read Dapper Dan's memoir, where he describes these kids coming in and dropping $20,000 to $30,000 in a single visit, I had to put the book down because these are not established kingpins. These are teenagers and early 20-somethings, and they are spending more on a single outfit than most people in their neighborhood made in 6 months. But that wasn't even the flashiest part. Rich Porter, by every account, had a different car for every day of the week. BM, WS, Mercedes, a Porsche, a Jaguar. He paid for his kid brother Donnell to have custom gear, custom jewelry, the whole uptown Prince treatment before Donnell was old enough to be in middle school. Alpo matched him move for move, sometimes louder. There's a story confirmed in multiple documentaries and in Azie's own telling that Alpo had a Mercedes with Poe spelled out in diamonds on the dashboard. The Mercedes alone was over $60,000. The diamonds on the dashboard were a separate line item. That decision to floss like that, to become famous on those blocks, is about to cost every single one of them something they cannot get back. Because the thing about being young, black, and rich in Harlem in 1986 is that the federal government is watching. The New York Police Department is watching. The crackhead on the corner is watching. And the stick-up kids, the boys who do not have a connect, who do not have the patience for the game, who look at a dude in a Dapper Dan fur coat and see a walking ATM. They are watching hardest of all. There was a stick-up crew out of the Bronx in this era, well documented in later federal cases, who specifically targeted Harlem dealers. They would follow dealers home from the clubs. They would kidnap family members. They would do anything for a lick. Rich Porter's little brother, Donald, was the softest target on the map. Donald Porter, 12 years old, was kidnapped off the streets of Harlem and held for ransom. A tragedy that unfolded in the years surrounding Rich Porter's own death. Rich pays. By multiple accounts, including Azie's, he pays somewhere in the range of $500,000, maybe more. The exact number has never been verified, but federal investigators who later looked into the case confirmed the ransom was substantial. Donald still does not come home. Rich searches for months. He goes down to Baltimore himself. He drives those streets looking for his little brother. In the summer of 1987, Donald Porter's body is found in Baltimore. He had been murdered, and the story Rich got later was that he had been killed within days of the kidnapping. The ransom was a lie. The money was gone. The little brother was gone. I went down the rabbit hole on this part of the story, and it still messes me up. Because Donald was 12, he was not in the game. He was a kid whose big brother happened to be famous on the wrong blocks. Now, here's the thing about that kind of pain on the streets. It makes people reckless. It makes them paranoid. And Rich Porter, who had been the charisma engine of the whole Uptown movement, started moving different after Donald died. The smile got thinner. The trust got shorter. And meanwhile, Azie Faison, in October of 1987, sitting in that third-floor apartment off 147th Street, is about to have his own night. 4 men in the apartment, Azie and 3 friends. By Azie's own account in Game Over, they were counting money, handling business, nothing that 100 nights before had not looked exactly the same. The door comes in. Gunmen. According to every version of this story Azie has ever told, including in the documentary he later made titled Game Over, The Rise and Transformation of a Harlem Hustler, he was shot 9 times. 2 of his friends were killed on the spot. He survived, barely, by playing dead on the floor while the shooters cleaned out the apartment. 9 bullets. Let that number sit with you. He would later tell interviewers that he died that night. The Azie that was living before that did not walk out of that apartment. Somebody else did. The shooters were never officially tied to anyone in court. Azie has said publicly he has his suspicions. The streets have their own suspicions, and those suspicions run in directions that make a lot of people in Harlem uncomfortable to this day. But here's what that night did. It changed Azie. While he was still recovering, still on pain medication, still walking with a limp, he made a decision that separates him from every other man we have talked about in this story so far. He got out. By 1988, Azie Faison, according to his own account, and corroborated by multiple people in his orbit, had stepped away from the game. He was not going to court. He was not flipping. He was not testifying. He was just walking away back to his mother's apartment, out of the clubs, out of the flash, out of the rotation. The thing I keep coming back to is this. Of the 3 names on those blocks, Azie, Rich, and Alpo, Azie is the one the streets expected to die first. 9 bullets. You do not come back from 9 bullets twice. And yet he was the one who saw the door out of the hallway and took it. But the streets were already moving. And by the time Azie figured out what was really happening between Rich and Alpo, it was already too late. January 3rd, 1990, Harlem. Rich Porter, in his mid-20s, is found dead in a Harlem vacant lot, shot in the head. The case is officially unsolved for years, but the name that circulates on the streets immediately, within hours, within days, is Alpo. Now, for a long time, this was just street talk. Federal indictments, court testimony, and Alpo's own eventual admissions would later confirm what the streets already knew. In 1991, Alpo Martinez was arrested on federal drug and murder charges out of Washington, D.C., where he had relocated his operation. And when the weight of those charges came down, Alpo did what a lot of people in his position did in the early 90s. He cooperated. The federal case against him resulted in Alpo admitting, as part of his cooperation, to a string of murders, including, according to multiple reports, the killing of Rich Porter. I want you to sit with that for a second, because these were best friends. These were brothers by the block. These were the two faces of uptown hustling in the late 1980s. Rich Porter was the godfather to Alpo's kid, or close to it, depending on which source you read, and Alpo, according to his own federal cooperation, pulled the trigger. The motive, as reported in court filings and in subsequent documentary interviews, came down to money. Alpo had allegedly skimmed or stolen from Rich. Rich had found out or was close to finding out, and Alpo moved first. As later reporting would frame it, Porter's murder was not a street beef. It was an execution carried out by someone he trusted. Alpo's cooperation got him a reduced sentence. He went into witness protection. For years, the streets did not know exactly where he was. There were rumors he was in Maine, rumors he was in Arizona, rumors he was dead. He was not dead, not yet. And what the streets did not know yet was that Alpo's story was going to have one more chapter, decades later, that would close the loop in a way nobody saw coming. Meanwhile, back in Harlem, Azie Faison is alive. He's broke, relatively speaking, compared to what he used to be. He's trying to figure out what a second life looks like for a man who did everything he was supposed to do by the rules of the street and still watch everyone around him die. In the years that followed, he put out the documentary Game Over, which circulated on VHS and DVD through New York's corner stores and became an underground classic. Nobody in the mainstream documentary world was paying attention, but every dude on every project from Harlem to Brownsville had a copy. Then, in 2002, Damon Dash and Rockefeller Films released the feature film Paid in Full, loosely based on the story of Azie, Rich, and Alpo. Wood Harris plays Ace. Makey Pfeiffer plays Mitch, the Rich Porter character. Cameron plays Rico, the Alpo character. The movie hit hard. It became, for a generation of kids who weren't even born in 1987, the definitive telling of that Harlem era. And here's the irony I cannot get over. The same streets that built these three kids into legends and then buried two of them also turned them into cultural monuments. Jay-Z name checks them. Nas name checks them. Cameron devotes entire verses to them. Rich Porter's name appears in more rap lyrics than most sitting U.S. senators. In the years since, writers compared Rich Porter to a kind of Harlem James Dean, forever young, forever sharp, forever a what could have been. Azie, for his part, became something different. He became the survivor, the one who made it out, the one doing the interviews, the college lectures, the warnings to the next generation. He has spoken at churches, at community centers, at high schools. He has been consistent in one message. The life he lived was not worth what it cost. And then, 2021, Harlem. A man is shot in a pickup truck on the street, not far from where it all began in the early morning hours. Multiple gunshots. He is pronounced dead at the scene. The man is Alberto Alpo Martinez. He was 55 years old. He had, at some point, left witness protection and returned to New York. The exact circumstances of how and why he was back on those streets remain disputed, but he was back, and somebody found him. The case, as of the most recent reporting, remains officially unsolved. Think about that for a moment. Of the three names that defined uptown Harlem in the late 1980s, one died in a vacant lot in 1990, one died in a pickup truck in 2021, and one is still alive. still talking, still telling the story, and that is the thing that keeps this whole story spinning in my head. Azie Faison was not the most flamboyant, he was not the biggest, he was not the loudest, but he was the one who understood, after 9 bullets in a third-floor apartment in 1987, that the game was not a career, it was a sentence. He has said in interviews, "Everybody I came up with is either dead or in prison. I'm the exception, and I'm not the exception because I was smarter. I'm the exception because I got lucky, and I listened to the lesson when it came." The apartment off 147th Street is still there. The hallway still smells like old paint. The door has been replaced. The carpet has been replaced. The building has changed hands. But if you ask the older heads on those blocks, the ones who were there in 1987, they can still point to the window. They can still tell you which floor. They can still tell you the night Ace caught 9 and somehow walked out. Whether Azie Faison is a cautionary tale, a survivor, or something harder to name is a question I do not think even he has fully answered. What I can tell you is this: he is still here. Rich is not, Alpo is not, and the Harlem they built their short, bright, bloody empire in is still arguing about who did what to who. If you want to hear about another Harlem legend whose story runs parallel to this one, watch our other video. Subscribe to the channel.